Daddy, is it true Mommy was killed because of us? Those 6 words shattered Alessandro Moretti's world. When his 6-year-old twins asked that question through tears, Lex realized someone had been poisoning their minds, his fiancée, Serena Castellano. But what began as emotional cruelty soon turned into psychological warfare, lies, and manipulation inside his own fortress. Who's telling the truth? The mafia princess he's about to marry, or the orphan nanny who has nothing left to lose? The sound of crying pierced through the silence of the Moretti mansion like gunshots. Lex dropped his car keys onto the marble floor and sprinted toward the stairs, taking 2 steps at a time. His heart pounded in his world. A child's scream could mean danger, enemies, death. "Matteo, Marco," he called out. The twins' voices echoed faintly from upstairs. When Lex pushed open their bedroom door, the sight froze him in place. Grace, their nanny of 3 years, was sitting on the floor, holding both 6-year-old boys in her arms. All 3 were crying. Matteo's small face was buried against her shoulder, and Marco clung to her sleeve as if his life depended on it. Lex knelt beside them. What happened? His voice cracked a sound his enemies had never heard. Grace looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen. "Mr. Moretti, She swallowed hard, brushing her tears away. "The boys were terrified when I came in this morning." "Terrified of what?" He gently cupped Matteo's trembling face. "Hey, buddy, talk to me." Grace hesitated, glancing toward the door as if afraid someone might overhear. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Miss Serena had an argument with them last night. After you left for the airport." Lex frowned. "An argument?" "They're 6 years old, Grace." "What kind of argument?" she yelled at them. "Sir," said horrible things about their mother. Lex's stomach tightened. "Isabella." Grace nodded. "She told them their mom was killed because of them, that if they hadn't existed, Mrs. Isabella wouldn't have been home that night, that the assassins came because of them." For a moment, Lex couldn't breathe. His late wife, Isabella, had been murdered 3 years ago by the Kozlov syndicate shot while shielding the twins from gunfire. She died a hero, and now Serena, his fiancée, daughter of his most powerful ally, was twisting that sacrifice into guilt. He turned to his sons. Matteo's small voice broke the silence. "Daddy, are you going to die because of us too?" Those words hit Lex like a physical blow. He pulled them both into his arms, holding them so tightly they could barely breathe. No, my angels. Daddy's not going anywhere. Ever." Was it true what she said? Marco's voice shook. That Mommy died because we were bad? Lex blinked through tears he hadn't shed since Isabella's funeral. "Your mom died protecting you because she loved you more than her own life. It was never your fault. Never." The boys clung to him, their sobs softening, but their small bodies still trembling. Lex looked at Grace. "You're sure Serena said those things?" Grace nodded silently. He stood up, anger rising beneath his grief. Serena had always been sweet, patient, the woman who had helped him survive Isabella's death, who had been so kind to his children, at least when he was around. "Stay with them," he told Grace, grabbing his phone as he stepped into the hallway. Serena had flown to New York to visit her mother that morning. He dialed her number. After a few rings, her bright voice answered. "Hey, babe. You're home already? How was the flight?" Lex's tone was ice cold. "Serena, I need to ask you something. Did you argue with the boys last night?" A pause. Then a surprised laugh. "Argue? No, of course not." "Why?" "Because I just found them hysterical. Grace said you yelled at them and said awful things about Isabella." Another pause. Longer this time. Her voice dropped hurt, almost offended. "Lex, that's ridiculous. I would never say something like that. You know how much I love those kids." Grace said that? Maybe she misunderstood. Lex's jaw tightened. Grace doesn't misunderstand. She was shaking. "Darling," Serena sighed. "I didn't want to say this, but she's been acting strange lately. Jealous, maybe. I think it bothers her that I'm about to become the lady of this house. You know, boundaries." Lex rubbed his forehead. "Jealous? Come on, Serena." "Sweetheart," she said softly, her voice dripping with sincerity. "You know how I treat Matteo and Marco. I adore them. If anything serious had happened, don't you think they would have called you themselves?" He hesitated. That was true. Serena had always been affectionate around the boys when he was home. He had never seen any sign of cruelty. "I just don't want unnecessary tension here," she continued. "If Grace is spreading stories, maybe it's time we reconsider her position. I can't have that kind of negativity around the children. Especially with the wedding in 2 months. Lex's fists clenched. Firing Grace wasn't simple. She knew too much about his world, about the security protocols, about everything, and the boys loved her. Let's not jump to conclusions, he said flatly. I'll handle it when you're back. Of course, she said sweetly. I just want our family peaceful. I love you, Lex. And I love those boys like they're my own. He ended the call, but didn't feel reassured. Something cold settled in his chest, the same instinct that had kept him alive in a world of bullets and betrayal. Back in the bedroom, Matteo and Marco were curled up together on the bed, exhausted from crying. Grace sat beside them, brushing their hair gently. They've been calling her something behind your back, Grace said quietly. Lex looked at her. What? The mean lady. His blood ran cold. In all his years running the most dangerous organization in Chicago, Lex had never felt so powerless. His enemies he could destroy. But this war was inside his own home, and his children were the casualties. Before we continue, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell us in the comments, do you trust the nanny or the fiancé? The next morning, the Moretti estate was submerged in a heavy, oppressive stillness. Lex stood before the mirror in his bedroom, fastening his tie with hands that felt stiffer than usual. He hadn't slept the night before. The image of Matteo and Marco curled up in Grace's arms kept replaying in his mind, refusing to let him go. He had built this empire to protect his family, and yet now the enemy was inside the very house he called home. A suitcase sat packed and waiting beside the bed. The trip to Miami couldn't be delayed. The meeting with the Southern families had been arranged 2 months earlier, and in his world, a promise broken could mean war. But leaving the children here, with Serena, after what he had just learned? The thought made his chest tighten until it was hard to breathe. He picked up his phone and called Dominic. Bring Grace to my office. Right now. 5 minutes later, Grace stood at the doorway. She was still wearing the same simple clothes as always, but her eyes were swollen from the night before. She stepped in and closed the door behind her. You called for me, Mr. Moretti? Lex pointed to the chair across from his desk. Sit down, Grace. She sat, hands resting on her lap, posture straight, though her shoulders trembled slightly. Lex opened a drawer, took out a small black phone, and set it on the desk. This is a direct line to me. Only you and I know this number, no one else. Grace looked at the phone, then back at him. Sir, I don't understand. I have to go to Miami, Lex said, his voice low and steady. 5 days. During that time, I need you with Matteo and Marco. Don't take your eyes off them. Don't let them be alone with Serena. And most importantly, he emphasized every word, don't say anything to her about this conversation. Grace swallowed hard. And if she does something while you're gone? Lex rose, circled the desk, and stopped in front of her. He leaned down, lowering his voice, as if he were sharing something deadly. If anything happens, no matter what it is, you call me. Immediately. Whether it's 2 a.m. or the middle of a meeting, I will answer. But what if you can't? Grace's voice shook. I will, Lex said, firm as stone. You just keep the children safe. All right? Grace nodded slowly. Yes, sir. I'll protect them with my life. Something flickered in Lex's eyes. Maybe gratitude. Or maybe the sharp, quiet pain of realizing that the one person he could trust to protect his children was not the woman who was supposed to become his wife. He placed a hand on her shoulder, only for a brief second. Thank you, Grace. They stepped out of the office. Dominic stood in the hallway, arms folded, his expression as cold as ever. But when Grace passed him, he gave her a small nod, just a slight nod, almost easy to miss. Yet Grace understood. She wasn't completely alone. Lex went downstairs, where Matteo and Marco were waiting in their pajamas. They ran to him, clinging tightly to his legs. Where are you going, Dad? Matteo asked, his voice edged with worry. Are you coming back? Marco added, his lower lip trembling. Lex knelt, drawing them both into his arms. I'm leaving for work for a few days. I'll be back very soon, and I'll bring you both gifts. What gifts? Matteo's eyes brightened just a little. A secret, Lex said with a smile that never reached his eyes. But I need you two to promise me something. Stay with Nanny Grace. Listen to her. All right? The boys nodded at the same time. Lex kissed each of them on the forehead, then stood. He looked at Grace one more time, his gaze saying more than words ever could. Then he walked out the front door, where a sleek black car was already waiting. Dominic opened the door. Lex got in. The door shut. The car rolled forward, slowly leaving the tall iron gates behind, carrying away the master of the Moretti Empire. Grace stood in the grand entry hall, one hand gripping the black phone, the other resting on Mateo's shoulder. She watched the car disappear beyond the line of oak trees, and then the silence came down like a weight. She knew that from this moment on, she was standing alone in the middle of a battlefield, and her enemy was about to return. Less than 2 hours after Lex's car vanished from view, another black sedan glided through the iron gates of the Moretti estate. Grace was upstairs with the boys when she heard the engine. She went to the window, and her heart cinched tight. Serena was back. She stepped out of the car wearing designer sunglasses and carrying a leather handbag, moving with the confident poise of a queen returning to her own territory. Grace turned and looked at Mateo and Marco, who were on the floor fitting puzzle pieces together. "You two stay right here and play nicely. Nanny Grace has to go downstairs for a moment." Mateo lifted his head, worry in his eyes. "She's back, isn't she?" Grace tried to smile. "It's all right. I'll be right back." She went down the stairs, forcing her breathing into an even rhythm. The small black phone Lex had given her was tucked in her pocket, pressed against her chest like a protective charm. Serena was standing in the middle of the foyer, saying something to a servant. When she saw Grace appear on the staircase, she stopped, the eyes behind those sunglasses fixed on her without blinking. Then Serena removed the glasses. The look in her eyes made Grace shiver. The fake sweetness was gone. The friendly smile was gone. What remained was pure coldness, like a snake studying its prey. "Grace," Serena's voice rang out, sharp as a blade. "Into the living room, right now." It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. Grace followed her into the living room. Serena shut the door, and the click sounded like the lock of a cage. The vast room suddenly felt airless. Serena turned back, folding her arms across her chest. For several seconds, she said nothing. She simply stood there, looking Grace up and down with open contempt. "Listen carefully, Grace Sullivan," she said at last, her tone sweet in a way that was almost terrifying. "I know what you said to Lex." Grace felt the blood in her body turn cold, but she didn't step back. "I only told the truth." Serena laughed. There was no warmth in it, only scorn. "The truth? Who do you think you are, daring to speak to me about truth?" She took a step closer, her heels striking the wood floor like a countdown. "Who are you, Grace? A nanny, an orphan with no family, no one to protect you. You live on other people's pity. You have nothing. You are nothing." Each word landed like a knife to Grace's chest. She thought of her parents, of the fire 9 years ago, of the nights she held Lucia and cried in a damp rented room. But she didn't cry. She'd cried enough. "And me," Serena continued, lifting her chin. "I am Serena Castellano, Don Castellano's daughter. Do you know what that name means? It means power. It means that in 2 months, I will be the mistress of this house. I will be Alessandro Moretti's wife. And those children," she emphasized each word, "will call me mother." Anger flared in Grace's chest. "They already have a mother. Isabella." Serena's eyes darkened. "Isabella is dead," she snarled. "And what belongs to the dead will be forgotten, including her memory in those children's minds. You don't have the right to do that." "I have every right," Serena cut in, her voice like steel. "And you? You will disappear. Soon. And when you disappear, no one will remember you. Lex won't remember. The children will forget. You'll be nothing more than a blurred name in the past." Grace drew in a deep breath. She thought of Mateo and Marco upstairs, of the fear in their eyes last night, of the promise she had made to Lex. She straightened her back and met Serena's stare. "I'm not going anywhere." Serena blinked, clearly not expecting resistance, but then she smiled, slow and dangerous. "Oh, you're brave. I'll give you that." She moved closer, close enough that Grace could smell the expensive perfume clinging to her skin. "But bravery won't save you, Grace Sullivan. No one will save you. Not Lex, not the children, no one." Serena tilted her head, lowering her voice into a whisper. "We'll see who's still standing when Lex comes back. You, or me. But I can tell you the result in advance." She turned on her heel and walked to the door. Before she opened it, she looked back at Grace one last time. 5 days, Grace. You have 5 days. Use them well." The door opened, then closed again. Grace stood alone in the silent room, her heart pounding hard inside her chest. She lifted a hand to her breast, feeling the black phone still resting in her pocket. The war had officially begun, and Grace knew she was fighting an enemy with nothing left to lose, except everything. The first day passed like a nightmare with no end in sight. In the morning, Serena behaved as if the confrontation in the living room had never happened. She smiled at the servants, spoke softly on the phone, even asked after the chef's health, but Grace knew it was all theater. The real storm arrived at dinner. Matteo and Marco sat down at the table, their eyes still carrying that timid, shaken look after everything that had happened. When Serena entered the dining room, both boys lowered their heads, afraid to look at her. "Aren't you going to greet me?" Serena's voice rang out, sweet on the surface, yet icy underneath. Matteo managed a small, murmured greeting. Marco said nothing at all, only curled in on himself. Serena stood perfectly still for a moment, then nodded to a servant. "Clear their plates. The children won't be eating tonight." Grace shot to her feet. "Miss Castellano, they're only children. Children need to learn how to respect adults." Serena cut in, her voice steady, unbothered. "If they don't know how to greet properly, they don't deserve to eat." The plates were taken away. Matteo and Marco sat there, hungry, tears swelling in their eyes. Grace bit down hard on her lip to keep from screaming. That night, when the entire estate had fallen asleep, Grace slipped down to the kitchen. She made 2 simple sandwiches and carried them up to the boys' room. They were sitting on the bed, clinging to each other, unable to sleep from hunger. When they saw Grace with the plate, their faces lit up. "Eat quickly," Grace whispered. "Don't let anyone know." They had barely taken the first bite when the door flew open. Serena stood there, her eyes blazing as if she could burn the air itself. "I knew it," she said slowly. "How stupid do you think I am?" Grace stood up at once, placing herself between Serena and the children. "They're hungry. They need to eat. They need discipline," Serena snapped. "And you? You're teaching them to disobey. This is your final warning. Next time, you won't be here anymore." She turned and walked out, leaving Grace and the boys in the darkness. Matteo trembled. "Nanny Grace, I'm scared." Grace pulled both of them into her arms. "I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you." But inside, she knew she was lying. The second day was even worse. Serena issued a new rule. Grace was not allowed into the boys' room after 7 in the evening. "I'll take care of them," Serena said with a false smile. "You need rest. A tired nanny is useless." Grace wanted to argue, but she knew it would only make everything worse. That night, she stood in the hallway, listening to what was happening behind the closed door of the boys' room. Serena's voice carried through, sharp and cold. "Stand in the corner, both of you." "But we didn't do anything wrong," Matteo protested. "You exist. That's already wrong." Silence followed. Then the soft patter of little footsteps and the sound of muffled sniffles. Grace pressed a hand over her mouth so she wouldn't cry out loud. 2 hours. 2 6-year-old boys standing in the corner for 2 full hours. Grace counted every minute by the clock in her own room, each minute like a knife slicing into her heart. When she finally heard Serena allow them to go to bed, Grace peered through the crack of the door. What she saw made the blood in her veins turn to ice. Serena was standing beside Marco's bed, holding a photograph. Isabella's photograph, the one the boys kept hidden under their pillow. "You were hiding this?" Serena's voice turned sweet in a way that was horrifying. "Your mother is dead. And do you know why? Because you're bad. Because you exist. If you didn't exist, she would still be alive." "No," Marco sobbed. "Mama loved us." "Loved you?" Serena scoffed. Then she tore the photo in half, into quarters. The pieces fluttered to the floor like dead butterflies. The boys' crying rang out, tearing at Grace's heart until it felt like it might split apart. She wanted to rush in, wanted to protect them, but her feet felt nailed to the floor. If she acted now, Serena would have an excuse to throw her out. And if she was gone, who would stay with the boys? That night, when the estate had sunk into silence, Grace pulled out the small black phone. Her hands shook as she dialed. 1 ring, 2, 3, 4. "Hello, I'm in a meeting right now. Leave a message after the beep." Grace hung up, her heart dropping. She texted, "The children need you. Please call back. Emergency." She waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. An hour. No response. She called again. Still no answer. Another message. Still silence. Grace stared at the phone in her hand and understood a cruel truth. She was completely alone. Lex had promised he would answer, but he didn't. Maybe he was busy. Maybe the meeting mattered more. Maybe even if he read her messages, he would choose to believe Serena over her. She was only a nanny. Serena was Don Castellano's daughter, the boss's fiancée, a part of a world Grace would never truly belong to. Tears streamed down Grace's cheeks. She thought of Matteo and Marco asleep next door with tears still on their faces. She thought of Isabella's photograph torn to pieces on the floor. She thought of the promise she had made to Lex, to the children, to herself. Then she wiped her tears and stood up. If no one was coming to save them, she would do it herself. If I don't protect them, who will? On the night of the third day, the Moretti estate sank into darkness and a terrifying silence. Grace lay on her bed, eyes closed, but her mind kept spinning without mercy. She'd called Lex 3 more times during the day. Still, no one answered. The messages she sent felt like they'd fallen into a black hole. At last, exhaustion dragged her into a thin, restless sleep. At the same time, downstairs, Serena sat in her private room, under the dim glow of a table lamp. She held her phone and dialed a familiar number. After 2 rings, someone picked up on the other end. "Are you ready?" Serena asked, her voice low and cold. "Everything's prepared, Miss Castellano, just as you requested." "Good." Serena smiled in the dark. Tonight is her last night. Tomorrow, when the sun rises, Grace Sullivan will disappear from this house, forever. She ended the call and set the phone down on the table. From the drawer, she took out a small bag containing white powder and a bottle of high-dose sleeping pills. These were things she'd prepared in advance, waiting for the right moment. And that moment had come. Serena looked at the clock. 11 o'clock at night. Too early. She needed to wait until the entire estate was deep asleep. She poured herself a glass of wine, sat back in her chair, and waited. Each minute passed like a tiny drop of venom falling, one after another. 2 o'clock in the morning. The estate lay still, like a massive tomb. Serena stood, taking the bag of white powder and the bottle with her. She opened her door slowly, without a sound. The hallway was pitch dark, lit only by faint moonlight slipping through the windows. Serena moved like a ghost, footsteps soft on the carpet. She'd lived in this house long enough to know which floorboards would creak, which corners held security cameras. But she wasn't worried about the cameras. Her father, Don Castellano, had someone inside the Moretti security system. Everything would be handled. Grace's door wasn't locked. Why would it be? She was only a nanny, with no enemies, nothing worth protecting. At least, that was what Grace believed. Serena pushed the door and stepped inside. The room was much smaller than Serena's, with only a single bed, an old wardrobe, and a small table. On that table was a photograph, and even in the darkness, Serena could tell it was a picture of the 2 little boys. She gave a contemptuous snort. Grace lay asleep, breathing evenly, her face peaceful in a way that was almost pathetic. She didn't know the real nightmare was about to begin. Serena moved quickly and precisely. She opened the wardrobe drawer and slid the bag of white powder into the middle of a stack of neatly folded clothes. Then she turned to Grace's handbag hanging from the wardrobe handle, opened it, and placed the bottle of sleeping pills inside. Perfect. She straightened and looked at Grace one last time. Moonlight streamed through the window and fell across the nanny's sleeping face. Serena tilted her head, lips curling into a poisonous smile. "Goodbye, little nanny," she whispered, soft as breath. "Tomorrow you'll wish you'd never stepped foot in this house." Then she turned and glided out the way she'd come in, without a sound. The door closed. Grace kept sleeping, unaware that the trap had snapped shut around her. But someone had seen. Marcus, the night shift guard, was making his rounds on the second-floor hallway when he saw a figure leaving Grace's room at 3 o'clock in the morning. He pressed himself into a dark corner and watched. Under the moonlight, he recognized Serena Castellano, the boss's fiancée, slipping away with a victorious look on her face. Marcus frowned. Why was she in the nanny's room at this hour? He was Dominic's man, trusted completely by the head of security. But this was the boss's fiancée. He had no right to question her. He also had no proof. Marcus stood there, torn. His instincts told him something was wrong, but he didn't know what to do. Report to whom? The boss was in Miami. Dominic had gone with him. And Serena, she was the one about to become the mistress of this house. In the end, Marcus decided to remember what he'd seen. The date, the time, the details. If something happened, he'd report it to Dominic when he returned. That was all he could do. He continued his patrol, leaving the hallway to its silence, and in the small room, Grace still slept, unaware that in just a few hours, her life was going to collapse completely. The trap had been set, the prey didn't know, and the hunter was waiting for dawn. Dawn on the 4th day rose over the Moretti estate, bringing a false kind of peace with it. Grace woke with a heavy, deep fatigue, worn down by too many sleepless nights. She stretched, not knowing that today would be the day her life collapsed completely. She went into the bathroom and got ready for a new day, her mind still tight with worry for Matteo and Marco. Around 8 o'clock in the morning, as Grace was coming down the stairs to prepare breakfast for the children, she heard Serena's screaming echo from below. "Get in here. Everyone get in here right now." Serena's voice was shrill, thick with theatrical panic. Grace ran down, her heart hammering. She saw Serena standing in the foyer, holding Grace's handbag, her face pale as if she'd just seen a ghost. "What is this?" Serena shouted, holding up a bottle. "High-dose sleeping pills. In your bag." Grace froze in place. "What? I don't. That's not mine." "Not yours?" Serena let out a cold laugh. "It's in your handbag, Grace Sullivan. What were you planning to do with this? Poison the children?" "No, I swear I don't know where it came from." Grace stepped toward Serena, but Serena backed away, her eyes filled with a practiced disgust. Serena pulled out her phone and dialed, her trembling hands performing panic for an audience. Lex, you have to listen to me. I just found high-dose sleeping pills in Grace's bag. She was going to poison the children." On the other end of the line, in the middle of an important meeting in Miami, Lex shot up from his chair. "What? What are you saying?" "Sleeping pills, Lex. A high dose. If she gave them to the children," Serena sobbed. "I don't know what to do. I'm so scared." Lex felt his blood boil. He thought of Matteo and Marco, thought of Grace's warning about Serena, and now this. Something was wrong, but he couldn't gamble with his children's safety. "Call the police," he ordered, his voice cold as ice. "Immediately. I'll be back in a few hours." Serena ended the call, and a smile flashed across her lips so quickly no one had time to notice. She turned to the servants. "Call the police, and keep her here." Grace wanted to run, wanted to call Lex to explain, but 2 servants stepped in to block her path. She was held in the foyer like a criminal, while Serena played the perfect victim. The police arrived within 20 minutes. 2 uniformed men walked in, but Grace immediately sensed something wasn't right. They nodded to Serena as if they knew her, asked no real questions, did no real investigating, and went straight to the point. "We need to search your room," one of them told Grace, his voice flat and emotionless. "I didn't do anything wrong," Grace pleaded. "Someone set me up, but no one listened. They hauled her upstairs into her room. And then, like a performance already staged, they found the small bag of white powder in her clothing drawer. Cocaine," the officer said, holding the bag up in front of Grace. "You're under arrest for possession of illegal substances and conspiracy to harm children." No, that isn't mine." "Someone!" Grace screamed, but the snap of handcuffs locking around her wrists cut through every explanation. They dragged her into the hallway and down the stairs. And that was when Grace saw Matteo and Marco standing at the bottom, their eyes wide with horror. "Nanny Grace!" Matteo screamed, running toward her. "What are you doing to Nanny Grace?" Marco stood frozen, tears streaming down his cheeks, unable to form a single word. "Stop," Serena said, holding Matteo back. "Don't go near her. Let me go." Matteo fought her grip. "She's not bad. She didn't do anything wrong. Nanny Grace." Grace looked at the children and felt her heart shatter into a million pieces. She wanted to hold them, wanted to tell them everything would be all right, but she knew that would be a lie. Nothing could be all right anymore. "Matteo, Marco," she said, her voice trembling but forcing calm. "Listen to me. I didn't do anything wrong. I love you, and I'll come back. I promise. Don't go." Marco finally broke into loud sobs, trying to run to her, but Serena held him tight. "Nanny Grace, don't go." The officer pulled Grace toward the door. She looked back one last time, carving the image of 2 little boys crying until they shook into her memory. It might be the last time she ever saw them. When the door closed, Serena dropped to her knees beside the children and pulled them into her arms with a show of false comfort. "Shh, you 2. Everything's going to be fine. She's a bad person. She was going to hurt you, but I protected you." "No," Matteo shoved Serena away. "You're lying. You're the bad one. You're the mean lady." Serena tightened her grip on Matteo's hand, hard enough to silence the boy. "You'll learn to be grateful," she whispered, her voice sweet but full of threat. "Now it's only me taking care of you." Outside, the police car door slammed shut behind Grace with a sound like a coffin lid closing. She sat inside, wrists cuffed, staring through the window. The Moretti estate receded farther and farther away, and somewhere inside it, the 2 children she loved more than her own life were crying out her name. The car began to move, and Grace knew she'd lost everything. The holding cell was cold and damp, the air sour with mildew. Grace sat on a hard bench, the marks of the handcuffs still pressed into her wrists. She looked down at her trembling hands, the hands that had held Matteo and Marco through so many nights when nightmares shook them awake, the hands that had wiped their tears when they cried for their mother. Now those hands were being treated as the hands of a criminal. She thought of Lucia, her 17-year-old sister, alone in a small apartment on the other side of the city. What would happen to her if Grace went to prison? Who would pay her tuition? Who would cook for her? Who would remind her to study and hold her when she felt sad and overwhelmed? Ever since their parents died in a fire 9 years ago, Grace had been everything Lucia had. She had worked without stopping to raise her, to give her a life that was better than the one they'd been handed. And now, because of a vicious scheme, she could lose everything. But what hurt most wasn't the idea of prison. It was the image of Matteo and Marco. What would they think of her? Serena would tell them she was bad, that she had meant to harm them. And little by little, maybe they would believe it. They would forget the nights she told them fairy tales, forget the mornings she made pancakes with smiling faces, forget every ounce of love she had poured into them. They would remember only the picture of her being dragged away like a criminal. She closed her eyes, and the memories from 3 years earlier came rushing back. The first day she stepped into the Moretti estate, she was nothing more than a 24-year-old girl desperate for a job so she could keep her sister fed. Back then, Isabella had been gone only a few months, and the 2 children were like small ghosts wandering through that enormous house. Matteo didn't speak a single word during the first week. Marco cried every night, calling for his mother in his sleep. Lex, then, was swallowed by work and alcohol, barely present at all. The boys were like orphans inside their own home. Grace had spent an entire year helping them open their hearts again. She sat beside their beds every night, telling them stories about an angel named Isabella watching over them from above. She cooked the foods they liked, learned how to make star-shaped cookies because Marco loved stars. She held them when they cried, sang lullabies when fear made their bodies tremble. Slowly, Matteo began to speak again. Marco began to laugh. They called her Nanny Grace, and she knew she had found her real family. Tears ran down Grace's cheeks. She wasn't crying because she'd been framed. She was crying because she was powerless, because she had promised she would protect them, and now she could do nothing, because she knew that once she was gone, Serena would have full control of them, and no one would be able to stop her. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. The cell door opened, and Lex stepped in. He stood there in a crisp black suit, his face cold as stone. There was no worry, no concern, only an icy disappointment. Grace sprang to her feet. "Mr. Moretti." "Sit down." His voice was sharp as a blade. Grace did not sit. She moved closer to the bars and looked straight into his eyes. "Mr. Moretti, I didn't do it. I swear on my sister's life. Those things aren't mine." Lex stared at her without blinking. "Evidence doesn't lie, Grace. Sleeping pills in your bag, cocaine in your drawer. How do you explain that?" "Serena set me up," Grace almost shouted. "She hates me. She hates the children. That night, someone came into my room. It had to be her. Please, believe me." Lex was silent for a moment. Something flickered in his eyes, maybe doubt, maybe a part of him that still wanted to believe her, but it vanished, replaced by the familiar coldness. "Serena is my fiancée," he said slowly. "She is Don Castellano's daughter, the most important ally the Moretti family has. You think I'm going to believe a nanny over her? You're believing fake evidence," Grace said, her voice shaking. "You're believing a woman who told your children their mother died because they were bad." Lex's jaw tightened. She knew she had struck the right wound, but it didn't soften him. Instead, he stepped back, and the distance between them opened like a chasm. "I won't press charges," he said. "I told the police to release you. No record. Consider this as if it never happened." A thin thread of hope sparked in Grace. "You believe me?" "No," Lex cut in, cold and final. "I just don't want a scandal. But you're not coming back. Ever. You'll receive 2 months' pay and leave Chicago. That's the deal." "No." Grace grabbed the bars. "You can't do this. What about Matteo and Marco? Who will protect them from her?" Lex had already turned his back. He stopped for 1 second, but he didn't look over his shoulder. "The children are no longer your concern." Then he walked away. His shoes echoed on the cement floor, each step like a hammer driving nails into Grace's heart. The station door shut behind him with a dry, brutal sound. Grace stood there, hands still gripping the bars, staring into the empty space where Lex had been. Then her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the cold floor, and a broken sob tore out from deep in her chest. She had lost everything. Her job, her home, the children she loved, and the man she had trusted, had discarded her like something damaged. Out there, Matteo and Marco were alone with Serena, and no one could save them. That afternoon, Grace walked out of the police station with legs that felt like lead. No handcuffs, no criminal record, and yet she had nothing left. She called a taxi with the last coins in her pocket and went back to the small apartment on the south side. When she opened the door and stepped inside, Lucia was sitting on the sofa, her eyes red as if she'd been crying all day. Her sister sprang to her feet, rushed over, then froze when she saw Grace's face. "Grace, what happened? Your face. Why is it bruised like that?" Grace looked down, not knowing what to say. She didn't remember when she'd been bruised. Maybe when the police dragged her too roughly. Maybe when she fell in the holding cell. She didn't know. She didn't want to know. No words could explain the pain inside her now. Grace only pulled her sister into a tight embrace, and the tears rose again. Lucia held her back, trembling, and didn't ask anything else. The two sisters stood there in the cramped apartment, holding each other and crying in silence. Dozens of miles away, the Moretti estate was sinking into a grim, oppressive mood. 2 days had passed since Grace had been thrown out, and the house seemed to have lost its soul. Matteo and Marco refused to eat. Plates were set in front of them and carried away untouched. They refused to speak to anyone, especially Serena. Every time she stepped into the room, they backed away as if they were looking at a monster. Serena tried to keep her sweet face in the first days, but her patience was wearing thin. On the morning of the second day, she walked into the boys' room and found Matteo sitting on the floor, hurling toys at the wall. "Stop it right now," Serena shouted. Matteo did not stop. He grabbed a toy car and threw it hard at the wardrobe. "I hate you," he screamed, his voice thick with rage. "You made Nanny Grace go away. You're a liar. I hate you." Serena stood frozen for a second, her face flushing with anger. Then she stepped forward, and before anyone could react, her hand swung out and slapped Matteo hard across the cheek. The sound of the slap cracked through the quiet room. Matteo fell to the floor, one hand clamped to his face, eyes wide with shock. He didn't cry. He only stared at Serena with an expression no 6-year-old should ever have, an expression full of fear and hatred. Marco was curled up in the corner, watching everything. He didn't cry out loud, but tears streamed down his cheeks. He clutched the teddy bear Nanny Grace had given him, trembling without stopping. "Next time," Serena said, her voice cold as ice. "You'll learn to respect me." Then she turned and walked out, leaving the two boys in a room full of broken toys and fear. That evening, Lex came home early, his trip cut short. He stepped into the estate with a heavy heart, the events of the past few days still spinning in his mind. Serena greeted him at the door with a bright smile and a sweet kiss, but he barely responded. He went straight upstairs to the boys' room. Matteo and Marco were lying on the bed, not asleep, only staring at the ceiling with empty eyes. When they saw Lex, they didn't run to hug him the way they always had. They only looked at him, then looked away. "Hey, kids." Lex sat on the bed, his voice gentle. "Dad's back." Silence. Then Lex's gaze stopped on Matteo's cheek. A red bruise, shaped like a handprint, stood out clearly against the boy's pale skin. Lex's heart felt like it was being squeezed until it couldn't breathe. "Matteo," he said, his voice tight. "What happened to you? Who hit you?" Matteo didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward the doorway, where Serena's shadow had just passed, then dropped again. The fear in his eyes was as plain as daylight. "Matteo." Lex gripped his son's shoulder. "Tell me. Who did this?" I fell," Matteo whispered, his voice shaking. "I wasn't careful." Lex stared at his son. The boy was lying. Lex knew it. A 6-year-old wasn't good at lying, and Matteo was worse than most. But why was he lying? Why was he afraid when he looked toward the door? Lex looked at Marco. The twin was curled into the corner of the bed, clutching the teddy bear, eyes glassy with tears. These two children, who had once been lively and happy, now looked like two baby birds trapped inside a cage. Lex stood and stepped into the hallway. Serena was waiting for him, the smile still on her lips. "The children have been a little difficult these past few days," she said. "Probably because of the Grace situation. But I'm handling it." Lex looked at her, and for the first time he didn't see the sweet woman he'd gotten engaged to. He saw something else, something cold. A seed of doubt was planted in his chest, and it began to sprout. The next morning, Lex sat in his office, eyes fixed on empty space. The image of the bruise on Matteo's cheek wouldn't leave him alone. "I fell," Matteo had said, but the fear in the boy's eyes when he looked toward the doorway, toward Serena, was not the fear of a child who had taken a tumble. It was the fear of a victim. A knock at the door pulled Lex out of his thoughts. "Come in." Dominic stepped inside, his expression more severe than usual. The head of security had been with Lex for 15 years, since the earliest days when Lex took control of the Moretti Empire. If there was anyone Lex trusted completely, it was Dominic. "Boss," Dominic said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something. In private." Lex nodded, signaling for him to close the door. Dominic moved forward and stopped at the desk. "About the night Miss Sullivan was arrested." Lex exhaled. "That's over, Dom. She's gone." "It's not over, boss." Dominic met Lex's eyes. "Marcus, the night guard on duty that night, reported something to me. He saw Miss Castellano leaving Miss Sullivan's room at 3 a.m, the night before the drugs and the sleeping pills were found." Lex shot to his feet, the chair scraping back with a harsh sound. "What? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I needed to verify it," Dominic answered, not flinching under his boss's anger. "Marcus is reliable. He has no reason to make something like that up. He didn't understand what he saw meant until he heard Miss Sullivan had been arrested." Lex planted both hands on the desk, fighting to control the fury rising in his chest. If what Dominic said was true, if Serena had gone into Grace's room that night, then there was only one explanation. She had framed Grace, and Lex had believed her. "Is there more?" Lex asked through clenched teeth. Dominic was silent for a moment, as if weighing every word. "I've watched Serena ever since she started coming here. The way she looks at the boys when you aren't present, it isn't the way a mother looks at children. It's the way someone looks at an obstacle, something that needs to be removed." Lex closed his eyes. Grace's words echoed in his head. "Serena set me up. She hates me. She hates the children." He hadn't believed her. He had chosen to believe the evidence, to believe Serena, to believe the alliance with the Castellano family, and in doing so, he had driven away the only person who truly loved his children. "If this is true," Lex said slowly, his voice weighted down, "then I threw out an innocent woman." Dominic didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence was answer enough. Lex straightened, his eyes igniting with a look Dominic knew well, the look of a hunter. "I need proof," Lex said. "Marcus's word isn't enough. I need to catch her." "What's your plan?" Lex walked to the window and looked out at the wide gardens beyond. "Install cameras, the entire estate, the living room, the hallways, the boys' room, with audio." "Secretly," Dominic nodded. "I'll call people I trust. It'll be done within 1 day. And Dom," Lex turned back to him, "no one can know. Not even the Castellano people in our security team." "Understood, boss." 24 hours later, the secret camera system was fully installed. Tiny cameras, almost invisible, hidden in the corners of walls, inside the chandelier, behind the paintings. Serena would never notice. That night, Lex walked into the living room where Serena was reading a magazine. He sat down beside her, his face revealing nothing of what was moving inside his mind. "My love," he said, "I had more security cameras installed in the house." Serena looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Cameras? Why?" "Family security," Lex replied calmly. "After the Grace situation, I realized the old system had blind spots. I want everything safe. For the children. For you." Serena smiled, relief clear on her face. "You did the right thing. I've been worried too after what happened. Who knows what else she might have been planning." Lex nodded, swallowing the disgust rising in his throat. "And I have to travel again for 3 more days. Miami. The business isn't finished." "You're leaving again?" Serena pretended to look sad. "I'll miss you. I'll miss you more." Lex kissed her forehead, a kiss cold as ice. The next morning, Lex drove out of the estate, but he didn't go to Miami. He went to a hotel only 15 minutes away, where a room had already been prepared with 3 large screens connected directly to the camera system inside the estate. He sat down, eyes locked on the monitors, and began to wait. The trap was set. Now all that remained was for the prey to walk into it on her own. On the first day in the hotel room, Lex sat in front of 3 screens, his eyes never leaving a single movement inside his own estate. He watched Serena from morning until night, cataloging every gesture, every word. That morning, she walked into the dining room, where Matteo and Marco sat with breakfast untouched in front of them. She stopped at the table and folded her arms. "Aren't you going to greet me?" Her voice came through the speakers, sharp and cold. The boys stayed silent, eyes down. "I'm asking you, don't you have mouths?" Matteo managed a small, mumbled greeting. Marco said nothing. Serena stood there a few seconds longer. contempt in her gaze, then turned and walked away. Lex frowned at the screen. Serena's behavior was clearly not the behavior of a loving mother, but it wasn't enough. He needed more than that. He needed proof that couldn't be denied. On the second day, Lex was nearly destroyed by lack of sleep. He lived on black coffee and the simmering rage inside his chest. That afternoon, while the boys were in their room, Serena sat in the living room and made a phone call. Lex turned the volume up as high as it would go. "Yeah, it's me," Serena's voice said, thick with triumph. "The plan worked. That little Grace girl is gone." Lex believed it like an idiot. Lex clenched his fist until his knuckles went white. "What's the next step?" Serena giggled. "Wait until the wedding. After the wedding, the children will be sent off to boarding school in Switzerland. Far away, nice and quiet. Lex won't object. He's busy all day. And once the brats are gone, Lex will be mine. His money will be mine. The Moretti empire will sit neatly in the hands of the Castellano family." Lex's blood felt like it was boiling. He'd heard enough to understand everything. Serena didn't love him. She had never loved him. It was all a scheme, a carefully calculated plan to seize his wealth. And Grace, the innocent nanny, had been sacrificed like a pawn on a chessboard. But Lex still waited. He needed more evidence. He needed something that even Don Castellano couldn't use to protect his daughter. On the third day, he got it. That afternoon, Lex was watching the screens when he saw Serena step into the boys' room. Marco was sitting alone on the bed, clutching his teddy bear. The boy looked up when the door opened, and fear immediately filled his small face. "Marco," Serena's voice rang out, sweet in a way that was terrifying. "Come here." Marco didn't move. He hugged the teddy bear tighter, as if it were the only lifeline he had left. Serena lost patience. She walked over, grabbed Marco by the hair, and yanked him off the bed. Marco screamed in pain, but Serena didn't let go. She dragged him into the middle of the room and shoved him down onto the floor. "Say it," Serena ordered, her voice cold as ice. "Say this. My mother died because of me," Marco cried, tears pouring down his cheeks. "I don't want to say it." "Say it," Serena screamed, and her hand swung out, slapping the boy hard across the cheek. Marco tipped sideways, his crying like the wounded cry of a small animal. "My mother died," he sobbed, words breaking apart in his tears. Because of me." Louder. "My mother died because of me." Marco screamed, his whole body shaking. Serena smiled. That smile, captured clearly on camera, was the smile of a devil. "Good," she said, her voice full of satisfaction. "Remember that whenever you think about disobeying. Your mother died because of you, and if you keep being bad, maybe your father will die because of you too." She turned and walked out, leaving Marco curled on the floor, crying without sound. In the hotel room, Lex sat completely still. The screen in front of him still showed Marco crying, but Lex no longer saw anything at all. His vision blurred with rage. The phone in his hand made a cracking sound. He had squeezed too hard, and the screen had splintered under the pressure of his fingers. His son, his 6-year-old child, forced to say his mother died because of him, slapped, tortured in his mind. And Lex had allowed it to happen. He had thrown Grace out and left the boys alone with this monster. Lex stood up, tipping the chair over. He screamed, a cry full of pain and fury, then punched the wall. Blood ran from his knuckles, but he felt nothing. Physical pain was nothing compared to the agony in his heart. He picked up the cracked phone and dialed Dominic. "Dom." His voice was steel cold. "Get everything ready. I'm coming home now." "Understood, boss. What's going on?" "I have proof." Lex ended the call and looked at the screen one last time. Marco was still crying on the bedroom floor. Alone. No one coming to comfort him. "Hang on," Lex whispered. "Dad's coming. And I'm going to end this." He walked out of the room, and the storm began moving toward the Moretti estate. The black car tore through the iron gates of the Moretti estate at a dizzying speed. Lex got out before it had fully stopped, his stride long and decisive, like a general walking into a final battle. Dominic was already waiting at the door and gave a confirming nod that everything was ready. Lex shoved the massive doors open and stepped into the main foyer. Serena was sitting on the sofa with a glass of wine in her hand. At the sound, she looked up, and her face immediately bloomed into a radiant smile. "My love, you're back early. I've missed you so much." She rose and moved toward Lex with her arms open, but he walked past as if she didn't exist. The smile on Serena's lips froze. "Lex? What's going on?" Lex didn't answer. He went straight into the living room, picked up the television remote, and turned it on. The screen lit up, and he connected his phone to the system. Serena followed, her confusion shifting into unease. "What are you doing?" "Lex, talk to me." Then the video began to play. Serena appeared on the large screen, sitting in this very living room, speaking on the phone. Her voice rang clearly through the silence. "The plan worked. That little Grace girl is gone." Lex believed it completely. "The kids will be sent to boarding school in Switzerland. Lex will be mine. His money will be mine. The Moretti empire will sit neatly in the hands of the Castellano family." The color drained from Serena's face. She stood motionless, her wine glass nearly slipping from her fingers. You recorded me?" Lex didn't look at her. He switched to the next video. This time the image was even more horrific. Serena yanked Marco by the hair and dragged him down to the floor. The slap cracked through the air. The boy's sobbing filled the room. "My mother died because of me." Marco's voice came through the speakers, raw with pain and desperation, and Serena on the screen smiled, satisfied like a victor. Lex turned the television off. The room sank into a heavy, crushing silence. He turned back, and the coldness in his eyes made Serena take a step back. "You have 1 hour to get out of my house." Serena swallowed, forcing herself to regain control. "Lex, you have to understand. The children need discipline. They don't listen, Discipline?" Lex cut in, his voice like steel. "You call forcing my son to say his mother died because of him discipline? You call slapping a 6-year-old discipline? You don't understand. They need." "Stop." Lex didn't raise his voice, but the chill in it shut Serena's mouth. "Every word you say only makes me want to kill you more." Serena saw she was losing. She changed tactics, her gaze hardening. "You can't do anything to me. My father is Don Castellano. The alliance between our families has been signed. If you touch me, you'll start a war you can't win." Lex looked at her for a long moment. Then he took out his phone, dialed a number, and put it on speaker. The ring sounded in the quiet room. Once, twice, then someone picked up. "Alessandro," Don Castellano's voice came through, deep and commanding. "What is it that you're calling at this hour?" "Don Castellano," Lex said, calm. "I have something you need to see." He played the video through the phone. Serena's voice spilled out, every word, from the phone call to the scene of Marco being abused. The room went dead silent for the entire recording. Serena stood trembling, pale, her eyes fixed on the phone as if it were her own death sentence. When the video ended, a long, terrifying silence spread out. Then Don Castellano's voice came again, slow and heavy. "In our world, there are lines that cannot be crossed. Children are one of them. We may be killers, criminals, but we don't touch children. That's the rule." "Father," Serena spoke, her voice shaking. "Father, I can explain." "Be quiet." Don Castellano's voice turned to ice. "From this moment on, you are no longer my daughter. You no longer carry the Castellano name. You are no longer protected by the family. Alessandro, do whatever you want with her. The Castellano family will not interfere." Father, no." Serena screamed and lunged toward the phone. "You can't do this to me. I'm your daughter. Father." The flat tone sounded. Don Castellano had ended the call. Serena collapsed to the floor, her legs no longer able to hold her up. She stared at the phone in Lex's hand, then looked up into his stone-cold face. In her eyes there was no pride left, no challenge, only the pure terror of someone who had just lost everything. 1 hour, Lex said, without a trace of emotion. "After that, I won't guarantee your safety anymore." He turned and walked away, leaving Serena sobbing on the floor. But the confrontation wasn't over. Serena still had one final card, and she was about to play it. 2 of Dominic's guards moved in, each gripping one of Serena's arms and hauling her upright. She didn't fight them. Her legs seemed to have lost all strength, and she let them drag her toward the door. Mascara ran in black streaks down her cheeks, her designer dress crushed and wrinkled, the flawless image she had spent so long building now completely destroyed. But just before she crossed the threshold, Serena suddenly stopped. She lifted her head, and a laugh spilled from her throat. It wasn't the laughter of joy. It was the mad laughter of someone with nothing left to lose. It echoed through the grand foyer and made even the 2 guards shiver. Lex had turned his back to walk away, but the laugh made him stop. He turned his head and looked at Serena with cold disdain. "What's so funny?" "Oh, Lex," Serena said, her voice breaking with laughter. "You think you've won. You think you know everything. Do you have anything left to say? Do you want the truth?" Serena lifted her chin higher, her eyes lighting with a manic gleam. "The full truth. Because what you know is only the tip of the iceberg, Alessandro Moretti. Lex said nothing, but he didn't turn away. Serena knew she had his attention. If she had to fall into hell, she would drag him down with her. That was all she had left. Grace Sullivan, Serena said slowly, savoring each word as if tasting an expensive wine. That pathetic nanny you just threw out. Do you know how her parents died? Lex frowned. What does that have to do with? A fire, Serena cut in. 9 years ago, the whole house burned to the ground in the night. Her parents burned to death. Only Grace and her sister survived because they were sleeping at their grandmother's that night. She tilted her head. Do you know who was behind that fire? The Kozlov crew. Lex stood perfectly still. Kozlov. The name hit him like a blade driven straight through his chest. The Kozlov crew were the ones who had killed Isabella. Oh, I can see you understand, Serena laughed. That's right, the same gang, the same killers. Grace's father was an accountant for a company my father wanted to take over. He knew too much. Kozlov was hired to clean it up, and they did a very thorough job. Lex felt his mind begin to spin. What are you saying? I'm not finished, Serena continued, her voice thick with pleasure. Isabella, your beloved wife. You think she died because of bad luck. You think Kozlov just happened to choose your house that night. She stepped forward a single pace, even as the guards held her tight. Who tipped Kozlov off to your exact location that night? Who made sure you wouldn't be home? Who arranged an emergency meeting to pull you away from the house on that very night? Lex couldn't breathe. No. My father, Serena said, each word a bullet. Don Castellano. He wanted you widowed. He wanted Isabella gone so I could step into your life. So that, in the end, the Castellano family could take the Moretti family from the inside. The room seemed to tilt. Lex had to brace himself against the wall to keep from falling. Isabella. His wife, the mother of his children. She hadn't died in an accident. She hadn't died in random violence. She had been murdered. Set up to be murdered. By the very man Lex had called an ally. And do you know what the most ironic part is? Serena laughed, the sound sharp as a crow's cry. The nanny you just threw out, that poor Grace Sullivan. She's an orphan because of the same people who killed your wife. She and you are victims of the same scheme. And you treated her like a criminal. Serena lifted her chin, and the smile on her lips was the smile of someone winning even as she lost. You were about to marry the daughter of the man who killed your wife, Lex. You were about to hand your entire empire to the family that slaughtered yours. Now you know. She let the guards pull her away, but before she disappeared through the door, she looked back one last time. Live with it, Alessandro Moretti. The door shut. Serena was gone, and Lex stood alone in the grand foyer as his world collapsed for the second time. He didn't know how long he stood there. Maybe a few seconds. Maybe a few minutes. Maybe an entire lifetime. Then his knees buckled. He sank into the nearest chair and buried his face in his hands. Isabella. Grace. The final pieces slid into place, and the full picture that formed was more brutal than any nightmare. Everything he thought he knew had been a lie, and he had driven away the only person who could truly understand his pain, the only person who truly loved his children, the only person who was also a victim just like him. Lex's car stopped in front of an aging apartment building on the south side of Chicago. He looked through the window, and something inside him tightened painfully. This is where Grace lived. Peeling walls, rusted stair rails, trash scattered along the walkway. She had worked for him for 3 years, cared for his children as if they were her own, and this was all she had. And he had treated her like a criminal. He stepped out of the car without bringing any guards. This was something he had to do alone. He climbed the narrow stairs and found apartment number 37 on the 4th floor. He stopped at the chipped, flaking door and knocked. A few seconds passed. Then the door opened a crack, and a young girl appeared. Lucia, Grace's sister. The 17-year-old looked at him with wary eyes, not a hint of fear in them. Who are you? Alessandro Moretti, Lex said. I need to see your sister. Lucia's gaze turned instantly cold. She recognized that name. You're the man who threw my sister out, Lucia said, her voice thick with anger. You're the man who believed the person who hurt her. You're not coming in. She planted herself in the doorway, even though she only came up to Lex's shoulder. But the fierce protectiveness in her eyes made him stop. This was the sister Grace had sacrificed everything to raise. This was the reason she'd needed that job badly enough to endure anything. Lucia, let her. Grace's voice came from behind. Lucia turned, ready to argue, but Grace had already stepped into view. Lex looked at her and felt his heart squeeze until it hurt. Grace had grown thinner in only a few days. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from lack of sleep. Her face was pale, but she still stood straight, still carried a dignity nothing could steal from her. "Mr. Moretti," Grace said, her voice empty of emotion. "Why are you here? I need to talk to you. Please let me come in." Grace looked at him for a long moment, then stepped back and opened the door wider. Lucia wanted to protest, but Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. "Go into the room, Lucia. Let me talk." Lucia went reluctantly, but not before throwing Lex a warning look. Lex stepped into the apartment. It was so small he could take it all in with one glance. An old sofa, a dining table with 2 mismatched chairs, a tiny kitchen corner. This entire apartment was probably no larger than the bathroom in his estate. And for the first time in his life, Alessandro Moretti, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, felt small. "Grace," he began, his voice rough. "I was wrong." Grace stood a few steps away, arms folded across her chest like armor. She said nothing, only watched him, waiting. "I have proof," Lex continued. "Serena set you up. She slipped into your room at 3 a.m. that night and planted the drugs and the sleeping pills. I have video of her admitting everything." Grace stayed silent. Her eyes revealed nothing. "You protected my children," Lex said, and his voice began to tremble. "You tried to warn me, but I was too blind to see. I believed the enemy instead of the woman who was protecting my children. I'm sorry, Grace. I'm sorry." Something flickered in Grace's eyes, but she hid it quickly. "The children?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "Are they all right?" Lex lowered his head, pain clear on his face. "They call your name every night. They won't eat. They won't sleep. Matteo asks when Nanny Grace is coming back. Marco holds the teddy bear you gave him and cries." Tears rose in Grace's eyes, but she fought to hold them back. "Is there more?" she asked, as if she already knew he wasn't finished. Lex drew a deep breath. This was the hardest part. "There's something you need to know. About your parents." Grace went still. "My parents. The fire 9 years ago," Lex said slowly. "It wasn't an accident. Your father was an accountant for a company Don Castellano wanted to take over. He knew too much. Castellano hired the Kozlov crew to kill him." Grace stumbled back a step, as if she'd been punched in the gut. "No, the same Kozlov crew that killed my wife," Lex went on, his voice bitter. "Isabella was killed on Don Castellano's orders so Serena could step into my life. Your parents and my wife died because of the same enemy. We are victims of the same scheme, Grace." Grace trembled, her legs threatening to give out. She braced herself against the wall as tears began to stream down her face. 9 years, she whispered. 9 years I thought it was an accident. I thought they died because of faulty wiring. She couldn't finish. Sobs broke free. 9 years of grief. 9 years of not knowing the truth. All spilling out in a single moment. Lex stepped forward and did something he had never done in front of anyone. He went down on his knees. The most powerful mafia boss in Chicago knelt before a nanny in a rundown apartment on the south side. "I will take revenge for all of it," he said, his voice firm. "For Isabella. For your parents. For the 9 years you lived inside a lie. But first, the children need you." He looked up at her, his eyes full of sincerity. "I need you, Grace. Please come back." Grace looked down at the man kneeling before her. The man who had thrown her out, who had not believed her, who had left her alone to face everything. But also the man who was humbling himself to apologize, who was giving her the truth she never would have known, who was begging her to return for the sake of the children she loved. She thought of Matteo and Marco, their smiles, the sound of them calling her Nanny Grace, the promise she had made before she was dragged away. She would come back. She had promised. And Grace Sullivan never broke a promise. She nodded, tears still running down her cheeks. "I'll come back. For the children." The car stopped in front of the iron gates of the Moretti estate that afternoon. Grace sat in the back seat, her heart beating out of rhythm. Beside her, Lucia gripped her sister's hand, eyes wide as she stared at the massive mansion rising in front of her. She had never seen a place like this. The iron gates swung open slowly, and the car rolled inside. Grace looked at the familiar gardens, the familiar stone path, and her chest tightened. She had thought she would never see this place again. The car stopped at the front doors. Lex got out first and opened the door for Grace and Lucia. He didn't speak. He only gave a small nod, as if he understood this moment belonged to Grace, not to him. Grace stepped out, her legs slightly unsteady. She stood before the towering doors and drew a deep breath. Then the doors opened, and she heard it. Nanny Grace. The shout came from the staircase, bright with joy and disbelief. Grace looked up and saw Matteo and Marco standing at the top of the stairs, eyes wide as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Then they ran. They flew down the staircase at a reckless speed, almost slipping, almost crashing into the railing, but they didn't stop. Nothing could have stopped them. Grace dropped to her knees just as two small bodies slammed into her. Matteo wrapped his arms around her neck from the left, Marco from the right. Both boys sobbed hard, the tears they had held back for days finally breaking free. "You didn't leave us," Matteo cried, his voice choking. "You came back. You really came back." "We knew you weren't bad," Marco sobbed. "We knew it. We told Dad you weren't bad." Grace held both children tight, her own tears pouring out without control. She kissed their hair, their cheeks, anywhere she could reach. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I will never leave you again. Never. I promise." Matteo lifted his face, soaked with tears but shining with a fierce light. He pointed to his cheek, where the bruise had faded but could still be seen. "She hit me," he said, with a heartbreaking kind of pride. "But I didn't cry. I was strong. I was strong for you." Grace's heart shattered into a million pieces. She touched the bruise gently, then bent to kiss it with all the tenderness she had. "You are the bravest child I have ever known," she whispered. "Both of you are. You're little warriors. I'm so proud of you." Marco buried his face against Grace's shoulder, refusing to let go. "You're staying, right?" he asked, his voice tiny. "You're not leaving again, right?" "I'm staying," Grace promised. "I'll be here every morning when you wake up. I'll be here every night when you go to sleep. I'm not going anywhere." Lex stood behind them, watching it all. He didn't say a word, didn't move, only stood there and looked on. His eyes burned, and he had to turn away for a moment to steady himself. He had almost destroyed this. He had almost stolen his children's happiness because of his own blindness. Lucia stood nearby, tears running down her cheeks, but a smile spread across her face. She watched her sister surrounded by love, needed, valued. This was everything Grace deserved. After a long while, when the tears had eased and the sobs had quieted, Lex stepped forward. He placed a hand on Lucia's shoulder, making the girl look up at him in surprise. "Lucia," he said, his voice warmer than anyone had ever heard. "You're going to stay here. That apartment on the south side isn't suitable anymore. You're Grace's family, and Grace's family is our family." Lucia's eyes widened. You mean it? I'll take care of your schooling. The best school in Chicago. You'll have your own room. You'll have everything you need. This is your home now." Grace looked up at Lex, and fresh tears spilled over. But this time they were tears of gratitude. He hadn't only brought her back. He had brought her sister, the only family she had left, into his protection as well. Matteo and Marco turned to look at Lucia with curiosity. "Who is she, Nanny Grace?" Matteo asked. Grace smiled through her tears. "This is Lucia, my little sister. From now on she'll live here with us." "Is she going to be Nanny Lucia?" Marco asked, eyes lighting up. "We'll have two nannies?" Lucia laughed and knelt beside the boys. "Hi, you two little guys. I've heard so much about you." Matteo and Marco looked at each other, then both lunged forward to hug Lucia, nearly knocking her over. Laughter rang through the grand foyer, pushing back the darkness that had hung over this house for days. Lex stood there, watching the scene in front of him. Grace, Lucia, Matteo, Marco. 4 people from different lives, different pain, now holding each other in the heart of his home. And something settled inside him with sudden clarity. This wasn't only the return of a nanny. This was the birth of a new family. 5 people standing in the great foyer of the Moretti estate. Not perfect. Not like any other family. But a real family. 3 months passed since the day Grace returned to the Moretti estate, and so much had changed. Justice was finally carried out in a way no one had expected. Lex quietly leaked proof of Don Castellano's crimes to the Kappa regimes within Castellano's own family. Evidence that he had betrayed an ally, ordered the murder of Lex's wife, and plotted to seize the Moretti Empire. In the mafia world, loyalty is everything, and when loyalty is betrayed, the consequences come swiftly. Within 6 weeks, Don Castellano was overthrown by the very men who had once been his most trusted loyalists. He lost everything: power, money, respect, and finally his life, taken on a storm, dark night in the outskirts of Chicago. No one mourned him. The Kozlov crew, the men who had killed Isabella and Grace's parents, did not escape either. Lex secretly provided information to the FBI about their operations, and a large-scale raid dismantled the entire organization. The people who had caused so much suffering now faced justice. As for Serena, She was arrested only 2 weeks after being thrown out of the Moretti estate. The charge was possession of illegal substances, the very cocaine she had used to frame Grace. There was a bitter irony in the weapon she had used to harm others turning back to destroy her. With no father, no family protection, Serena Castellano was now just an ordinary prisoner in a federal facility, waiting for trial. As the darkness began to lift, light started to fill the Moretti estate. The house that had once been packed with schemes and tears now rang with children's laughter every day. Matteo and Marco had returned to being innocent 6-year-old boys, running everywhere, mischievous and bright in the way they were meant to be. Nightmares no longer visited their sleep. Grace had officially become part of the Moretti family, not only in name but on legal paper as well. Lex handled every step. The visa, the residency paperwork, everything completed and secure. She no longer had to fear for her future or Lucia's. Her sister was now studying at one of the most prestigious private schools in Chicago, every cost paid by Lex. Lucia adapted quickly, and even became one of the top students in her class. Her dream of becoming a doctor no longer felt impossibly far away. Late one night, when the entire estate had fallen asleep, Grace stood alone on the balcony, looking out over the garden flooded with moonlight. She heard footsteps behind her, and didn't need to turn to know who it was. Lex came to stand beside her, and together they watched the night sky in silence. "Sometimes I think," Grace said at last, her voice as light as the wind, "tragedy leads us to our real family. If none of this had happened, I wouldn't be here. Matteo and Marco wouldn't have had anyone to protect them. Lucia wouldn't have this chance." Lex turned to look at her, moonlight shining on the steady face of the woman who had changed his life. "You saved my children," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You protected them when I couldn't, when I was too blind to see the truth. But more than that, you saved me. You showed me what real loyalty looks like, what unconditional love truly is." They looked at each other in the moonlight, and no more words were needed. Some things didn't have to be spoken to be understood. On Sunday morning that week, the estate garden was overflowing with laughter. Matteo and Marco were playing soccer with Lucia, their shouting echoing across the lawn. Grace stood as the referee, pretending to be stern, but every few minutes she burst into laughter at the children's ridiculous kicks and clumsy plays. Lex stood by the living room window, watching the scene. Afternoon sunlight poured over the garden and turned it into a perfect picture. He turned and looked at the new photograph placed on the mantel. In the photo, 5 people were smiling brightly. Lex stood in the middle, Matteo and Marco at his sides, Grace and Lucia behind them. A family that wasn't perfect, that didn't fit the traditional mold, but a real family all the same. And beside that new photo, Isabella's picture was still there. Her smile still shone. Her eyes still looked down into the room as if she were watching over them. Isabella would always be part of this family, forever living in the hearts of the people she loved. Grace did not come to replace her. Grace came to carry forward the legacy of love Isabella had left behind. That evening, after a warm and comforting dinner, Grace led Matteo and Marco upstairs to bed. She told them a fairy tale, sang a lullaby, and kissed each boy on the forehead before turning off the light. "Nanny Grace," Matteo called as she was about to leave the room. "You're going to be here forever, right?" Grace smiled, stepped closer, and brushed the boy's hair back. "Forever, my son, I promise." She closed the door, and the room fell into a gentle darkness. And upstairs, Matteo and Marco slept in true peace. No nightmares, no fear. Only the comfort of knowing that when dawn arrived, Nanny Grace would still be there. Always. Our story ends here, but the lessons it leaves will remain. This is a story about loyalty, about standing up to protect the vulnerable even when you have to pay the price yourself. This is a story about justice, about how the truth will always be revealed in the end, no matter how well evil tries to hide. And above all, this is a story about family, not family by blood, but family by choice, by love, by sacrifice. Grace taught us that an ordinary person without power and without money can still do extraordinary things when they have a courageous heart. And Lex showed us that even the most powerful people can make mistakes. But what matters is recognizing those mistakes and correcting them while there is still time. In real life, we may not face situations as dramatic as the ones in this story, but around us there are still children who need protection, still innocent people who are wrongly accused, still people who wear angel faces while carrying the hearts of devils. Be like Grace. Be brave enough to stand up for what is right, even if the cost is yourself. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever faced a moment when you had to stand up to protect someone even when it meant you would be the one to suffer? Share with us in the comments below. We truly want to hear your stories, your feelings from the deepest part of your heart. If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next moving stories. Please hit the like button and share this video with friends and loved ones to spread these good values to the people around you. Every subscription, every like, every share is a powerful source of motivation for us to continue bringing you quality content every single day. We sincerely thank you for taking the time to watch today's story. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, peace, and happiness every day. Always love and cherish the people around you, because real family isn't only the ones who share your blood, but also the ones who are willing to stand by you in your hardest moments. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next video.